Ontario Premier Doug Ford seems to have put himself in a very precarious position. He made the gamble that having an early election and justifying it with Trump bad was going to allow his PC party to easily cruise to another majority government. And that doesn't look to be true anymore. I made a polling analysis video about 4 to 5 days ago going over Doug Ford's chances of being reelected. And back then, I concluded that very likely he was going to get another majority government, and in fact, it could be bigger than his 2022 majority. Now that the election issues have changed, there's not going to be a trade war anymore, and Doug Ford got caught on a hot mic, things are kind of starting to reverse. Let's just do a bit of a review and look over the first 3 days of the campaign with Main Street's tracking poll. Then I want to look at days 7, 8, and 9. Here was day 1, and I like to use the charts this early in a campaign that include the undecideds because where they split or how many undecided people there are really tells you how the race is going. So day 1, PCs are at 32%, the Ontario Liberals and Cranberry at 24, and the NDP and Styles are at 19. Jump to day 2, you have the PC still at 32, the Liberals at 24, and the NDP at 18. Day 3, now what you see where I was starting to conclude this looks like an Ontario PC race and nobody else's because the PCs had jumped up from their 32 to a 35, the Ontario Liberals had fallen to 23, and the NDP had fallen significantly from day 1 from 19 points to 16. Everything was looking really good for Doug Ford, including on day 7, which was a day after the entire trade war was called off. On day 7, the man was at 38%. The Ontario Liberals 25. It makes sense that they were going to expand a little bit because they're clearly the main opposition to Ford in this election, and the NDP was all the way down at 14 points. It gets really bad after that, but maybe before I get into these other stats, these days 8 and 9, where things start to reverse, I want to highlight this from day 8 that kind of flavors why a lot of people might not be voting Doug Ford anymore. The question of this poll is, do you support or oppose the early election call? Unfortunately, Main Street seems to have stopped collecting this data on day 9 that I just looked at today, but I remember looking at these stats earlier on the election, and it was kind of 50-50 whether people support the early election or not. As people have become less undecided on this, it has basically become a 60-40, if not more than that, of a prospect. Here, we have 44% of people somewhat or very strongly supporting the early election, but 55% of people somewhat opposing or strongly opposing the election. Obviously, Ford can still win with 42% of the vote if we assume that 42% was on his side. But the problem is it might not be. Some of the people who support the election might actually be from the opposition parties because they want to take a swing at the government whenever they can. And a lot of people who might be ticked off might be PC voters saying, hey, Doug, you had a big majority. Why did you tear that up a year and a half early and force us back to the polls? And before I move forward now into day 8 and 9, I just want to mention to you guys Doug Ford's basically a liberal. He is so liberal that Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals, while they're not conservatives by any means, they are arguing that Ford is the one who was more like Justin Trudeau's Liberals than they are. Again, they're not conservative, but that's their argument that we're liberals, but we're not Trudeau liberals. And in fact, Ford is more of a Trudeau liberal than we are. It's very telling, and they're not just saying that. Doug Ford is basically a federal liberal. And I just want to put it out there, guys. If you live in Ontario, please consider voting for the New Blue Party of Ontario. Basically, if you're a federal conservative, the New Blue Party of Ontario's views will map onto yours like 1-to-1. You know, they're a generally socially conservative, fiscally conservative party. Their entire pitch is basically, how about we actually fulfill the promises the PC party made back in 2018? And so they started a new party vehicle to do that sort of stuff. Anyways, so now I want to move on to day 8 and 9, and then I want to get into the hot mic moment that requires a lot of context for, of course, why it ticks people off, as well as why is Ford a liar in more ways than one. Anyway, so Here on day 8, things start to reverse a little bit. Because as we saw on day 7, maybe I didn't show day 7, day 7, Doug Ford's at 38%, Liberals 25, NDP 14. No, I did show this. Now we go to day 8. Ontario PCs under Ford are 32. The Ontario Liberals are at 23, and the NDP is at 15. Notice how the undecideds went from 14. This was technically the trade war and the hot mic moment happened on day 5 and 6, although news cycles in Canada take a while to catch up. Sometimes you don't have news reports on things until like a day later, and so usually there's going to be a bit of a lag. But that's significant. From day 7, you have 14% of people undecided. Today, you have 22% of people undecided. And you can see that pound of flesh in terms of support mostly comes out of the Ontario PCs. They lose 6 points overnight. And, well, maybe day 9, people get a little bit less ticked off. No, not really. Day 9, undecideds go down, but Ontario PC support also goes down. They are down to 30%, with the Liberals at 24 and the NDP at 18. That's not very good at all. This is very much getting into death territory for the Ontario PC party, and they deserve it. What have they actually done in office? They're very, very liberal in terms of everything they do that's pro-business is like what Trudeau and Carney would do that's pro-business. So anyone who's like supporting them and saying, well, they're the more pro-business party. No, they're not. They're the subsidy party. But I want to get into this hot mic moment because I know that the Ontario PCs have been throwing tons of mud at Bonnie Crombie. And does she deserve it? Definitely. She's also not a very good politician. But that is to say that Ford and her equally suck, but Ford's supposed to be the one who shouldn't suck because he is the progressive conservative leader, and yet he basically only acts progressive. But this is the thing, on top of the fact that the entire election is now moot, the purpose of it is moot because there's no longer a trade war. You can't have all these Protect Ontario signs around you, protect Ontario workers, protect Ontario business. At the same time, there's really nothing to protect them from. And in fact, Ford was even steering Canada into a trade war because he thought it was good for his re-election chances. That by having Trump tariff us, that would make him seem like a strong man, even though, unlike Danielle Smith, he wasn't doing anything to protect the border to actually protect Ontarians from a trade war. But check out this news report from, I believe, Global.
It was a candid moment caught on camera Monday.
And the election day, was I happy this guy won? 100% I was. Then the guy pulled up the night.
Yeah, and so this is Doug Ford saying basically that he was very happy that Donald Trump was elected on election day in November of 2024. But now, oh, I can't believe he turned on us and like did this to us. One, by the way, do you actually think Doug Ford was happy that Donald Trump won? The man endorsed Tim Walz. The man, as soon as Tim Walz was picked as Kamala Harris's vice presidential candidate, talked about how like great it was to see that Tim was going to be on the ticket. He's a great fellow and a great guy. Like the only thing he didn't do was endorse, which you don't really do because you're a Canadian politician. But he did everything short of full on endorsing him. But he's trying to basically assure sort of blue collar conservatives that, oh yeah, I know I like Trump. I just can't believe he yanked us with this whole tariff situation. Like, what are you talking about? One, we know you didn't support Trump. Two, like you've been positioning yourself as the anti-Trump guy, and you've been not complying with any of the stuff around border security. You're complete fraud. But then he was caught on something else because he said like the opposite 5 seconds before he reassured people. No. I'm a really big Trump guy.
That came just moments after Doug Ford had denounced Donald Trump.
Do you still consider yourself a Trump supporter?
Absolutely not. It's been a disaster. I'd never support that guy in my entire life.
The hot mic comment immediately became campaign fodder. NDP.
Yeah, and it's going to go into NDP leader Merritt Stiles and Bonnie Crombie, and those two are the most boring people on the planet. Frankly, every time I see a photo of Merritt Stiles and Bonnie Crombie, I don't know who it is. I'd have to like put a Sharpie mark on one of them to keep them straight if I was in the same room. It's silly. Anyway, so yeah, this is not going very well for Doug Ford, and neither should it be going well. Again, go check out the New Blue Party of Ontario. consider voting for them. Consider running for the New Blue Party of Ontario if you don't have a candidate in your riding. They're going for a full slate of 124 candidates. But I want to take you through a little bit of the detail right now in the latest poll on day 9 of who is feeling trepidation. This is where I'm also going to say Doug Ford is very much a liberal in the sense that the disproportionate amount of his vote comes from, and obviously, if you're an older voter and you watch my show, you're obviously a very conservative person. But he gets most of his strength from the 65 plus crowd. His disproportionate support comes from that group. When that is actually much more of the federal liberal voting demographic. When I go through the Doug Ford voting demographics, it kind of lines up very closely with the type of people voting for Justin Trudeau. Older pensioners and people with graduate degrees or not, or like university degrees and whatnot. People who really don't care all that much when it comes to not, and this isn't say older, it's just that that's the disproportionate group where you get a lot of people who are pensioners, they vote progressive because it sounds nice and they don't work in the economy anyway, so they don't care about how it affects it. And that's really what you see with Doug Ford. People in younger age groups are like really when it comes to his government. And the thing that he's losing again is the 35 to 49 crowd and the 18 to 34. That is where there are more than a quarter of people who are currently undecided. And so with Ford calling an early election, it's the winner, and a lot of people are going to resent going out and voting. He has put himself in a position where the swing against him could be really bad. In fact, he used to have a 40% with men, and now it's down to 34%. He's already behind on women, and that was a big reverse again from the start, where he was actually ahead with all the different groups. And right now, and this is what really like is insane. He still has a little bit of a lead. It's Southwest and Northern Ontario. And the thing that bothers me the most is the Northern Ontario thing, because not this guy ripped up the Elon Musk Starlink deal to get better internet service for Northern Ontarians. So the people most neglected by the government got their internet deal torn up. And by the way, he tried to tape it up after the entire like scuffle with the Americans during the tariff war. He for some reason put that on the table as if it mattered, that he was going to rip up the Starlink deal to tick off Elon Musk because Elon Musk works for Trump in some capacity. Elon then said, okay, fair enough, we'll put it back together. Fair enough, water under the bridge. And then Doug Ford said this because he's still trying to be tough. He says, probably in response to the hot mic moment, seem even more anti-Trump in response. The people didn't care if he was pro-Trump or anti-Trump, although I always knew he was anti-Trump. At the same, people just didn't like the inconsistency, the obvious lying. And now he says, I can't support someone hell-bent on destroying our province. Ford tells CNN he remains prepared to rip up the deal with Elon Musk. Doug Ford's such a putz. Why are you ripping this up? Why are you threatening to? Basically, you're saying, I will threaten you by not letting Northern Ontarians on the internet to really irk you. I am prepared to irk you pretty hard there, Elon. And to do it, I'm going to keep kicking the Ontarians in the face who get kicked in the face the most. The people who are constantly neglected in the northern part of the province, even though you have extremely important industries up there that you should probably not be ticking people off around. If you live in Northern Ontario, like if you live in any other part of Ontario, please vote for the New Blue Party. Again, I'll link them in the description below. Check out if you have a candidate. If you do not, please consider running for them. These guys do not deserve to be reelected. I'm not saying, the Ontario Liberals should get elected, the Ontario NDP or the Greens should get elected. No. The whole point is they all suck. And there needs to be probably a new force in politics being built up in that province that's actually conservative. And I've said this before, this is not like the PPC is more conservative than the Conservative Party, so you can't vote federal conservative. The federal conservatives with Pierre Poilievre are very conservative. They are increasingly becoming more conservative over time. That should be rewarded. I don't like purity testing. I am not purity testing Doug Ford. He has gone in on every stupid subsidy boondoggle, green energy boondoggle with the federal Liberals. He went in with them with lockdowns, with mandates. There are still mandates on nurses and doctors in Ontario, and the even though they still are the best wait times in Canada, which is really just because of the fact that it's the biggest province and a lot of people want to live in it, they are starting to have wait times that are looking like the rest of Canada when it comes to healthcare. And this isn't like a Ford isn't funding the healthcare system enough, like the Liberals and the NDP will say. Ford funds it heavily. He funds it in the same way that any lefty would fund it, just dump money into it and be inefficient. But it's the fact that he had basically undermined nurses and doctors that is causing them to have a shortage of like hands on deck of beds. It's the same problem that David Eby caused in British Columbia. You fire a bunch of nurses and doctors and you don't bring them back. And when you kind of start bringing them back, it's like you still make them jump through 50 hoops and they don't trust you, so they're not going to do it and they go down south or they go to another province. If anything, Alberta has actually benefited a lot from the incompetence of David Eby in British Columbia and Doug Ford in Ontario because we are getting more nurses and doctors every day. Still not great wait times, but that's the Canadian healthcare system for you. But yeah, right now, Doug Ford is in a position where he could falter really hard right now. If an election was held today, probably doesn't win it. And if anything, it would be the ideal scenario. It'd be a hung parliament and nothing's going to get done because that is all we can really hope for in a place like Ontario, that they don't do anything. Because every time these politicians do stuff, your taxes go up, services become poorer quality, and corruption increases. That's another thing going on with Ford. They had a corruption scandal where staff members were basically acting as lobbyists for their friends to get them new land acquisitions. The thing is, I don't like the Greenbelt. It's overly large and it's overly restrictive on house building, and it's basically just an arbitrary line where you can't build. There's nothing outside of the Greenbelt even further that's unlike the Greenbelt. It's not the rainforest. And I actually support selling off some of the land for development. The problem is, even when Ford does that, he always does it for the wrong reasons and starts trying to sell the land for it to his friends. When he wants to privatize the LCBO, which I generally support in Alberta, we mostly have private liquor stores, far better for the economy, everything. The LCBO, even when he starts talking about privatizing it, he starts basically lining up friends of his to be on the board to get first dibs to buy it. Did you know that he gave the Toronto Star the first online gambling license in Ontario? Torstar, that left-wing rag, was about to go out of business. And maybe to get better media coverage, Doug Ford organized with their lobbying group to give them an online gambling license. So now the Toronto Star is fully funded by gambling addicts because Doug Ford is such a principled man. He is not. I am being very sarcastic. Anyways, that should be it for me today, guys. I'll see you in another video. I need to cover this ongoing election interference issue in British Columbia. It's crazy. People are signing affidavits that they're being threatened at this point. I'll be covering the Ontario election more. I, in fact, will be probably flying out to Kitchener, Cambridge to do door knocking on the 20th. So I'll try and do like a big spurt of like 5 days straight of door knocking. So I put my money where my mouth is. I might be an Albertan, but I will be coming to show up to support the new Blue Party. But again, other than that, that's it for me today, guys. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, check out the new Blue Party, and leave a comment on anything you want me to, talk about next time or that you noticed about the topic. Anyways, see ya.